Sadhu Sundar Singh, Call of God, Chapter 25. Sadhu Sundar Singh in South India. I speak those things which I have heard of him. As my Father hath taught me, I speak these things. John 8:26 and 28. Obey, I beseech thee, the voice of the Lord, which I speak unto thee. So shall thy soul live. Jeremiah 38, verse 20. Without any idea of the protracted tour in front of him, the Sadhu came down to Madras at the beginning of 1918, intending to visit a few places before starting for Tibet. But his fame had preceded him, and invitations poured in upon him from all over South India. An offer voluntarily made by a gentleman in Madras, Madras, to act as an interpreter for a few weeks caused him to alter his plans and to accept a program which eventually included Travancore and so on. Each day, fresh entreaties reached him from all directions, and out of them grew that great evangelistical tour, not only through the South and so on, but also Burma, the Federated Malaya States, China, and Japan. The large Christian community of South India provided an immense sphere for his operations, and, regardless of distinction of caste or creed, thousands flocked to his meetings everywhere. His work was varied and strenuous. Often the day's work began so early and continued so late that he had scarcely time for meals, and no leisure even for the study of his New Testament. In places where he spent many days, the people rested after his departure as a man does with a good meal. But in no time did people imagine that the Sadhu needed rest. Long days of engagements were succeeded by a wearisome night's journey by boat, bullock cart, or train. The new day's work began upon arrival and continued until departure. Public meetings were usually held morning and evening, and for hours between the Sadhu sat, received visitors, and holding interviews when he gave advice, solved the religious problems that were presented to him, and answered inquirers as far as he was able. The number present on such occasions varied from a single person to 100 or more. The value of these meetings was testified to by the witness of those who attended them, as also by the fact that the longer the Sadhu stayed in a place, the greater were the numbers who sought to seek him. In one place where great numbers sought him for spiritual guidance, a student in the hostel where he stayed made it his happy duty to watch over him by admitting the visitors. The young man kept the key of the Sadhu's door, and as the time for devotions or meals came round, some small measure of privacy and rest was assured. In large centers where there were colleges and high schools, these were visited between morning and evening meetings, and addresses were given to the students. The acceptance of invitation to private houses to meet parties of Christians involved extra work at the close of an arduous days. The barrier of language was a difficulty in the South, where so many Dravidian, Dravidian tongues are spoken. Wherever possible, interviews were conducted in English. But at many of these, as well as in public, the Sadhu was often obliged to speak by interpretation, and that not always of the best. To one so ardent in temperament, so full of his message, so anxious for souls, this language difficulty was a very real one. But to see him at these times, no one would surmise his feelings. The Sadhu seeks for no disciples to follow his example. He rightly holds that a man must have a distinct call of God to embark on such a life. His advice to all is sane, wise, suited to the people to whom it is given. His development of his example in bringing him up in reverence religion is a constant parable of life in his talks to women. He often says, if a non-Christian mother can do so much for her son, how much more can you Christian mothers do for your sons? Deeply loving the New Testament himself, he speaks of Christians loving it more than he, since they have never torn or burnt it as he did once, but have been trained to honor and love it. How constant-stricken many of his hearers are when they hear him say this, he does not know. It has been no uncommon thing during the Sadhu's stay in South India for Hindus to seek him in the silent hours of the night, when he will spend and be spent in their service while others sleep. Growing demands were made on his time and strength by the numbers of letters he received from people in places he had visited, and the requests for his prayers were legend. Christians by thousands who have seen Sadhu Sundar Singh behold in him what it is possible for God to make of a man who submits himself soul and body to a Savior, and so long as he is visible, people never grow weary of looking at him. They have received him and his message with great joy wherever he has been, the only regret being that he could not stay longer to consolidate his work. How deep and far-reaching the results of his work are only God knows. But that his coming was timely and that God sent him, none can for a moment doubt. He places before men the true ideal of a godly life of self-surrender to God and of self-abnegation in his service. End of chapter 25, having been read by Peter John Perseus.